Finland's border with Russia is absolutely massive, running for more than 800 miles across one of the wildest, most desolate regions on the entire planet. It's a place full of frozen forests, impassable marshes, and some of the thickest concentrations of mosquitoes you'll find anywhere. But this border also has a unique feature that makes it especially vulnerable to attempted Russian invasions. More than most international borders, the border between Russia and Finland is wide open, geographically speaking. Most of it does not follow any specific natural feature, such as a river or a mountain range, where a defense line could easily be created to hold an invading force at bay. And as the world has modernized beyond even the wildest imaginations of those who signed the original border treaties, these days, any given spot on the border between Russia and Finland can now be easily crossed by a modern mechanized army coming from either side. That single fact, or more accurately, the fear of that single fact, has defined much of the recent history between Finland and Russia. Finland's border sits less than 150 kilometers from St. Petersburg, putting them just a few hours away if they decided to conduct a ground assault on the second largest city in Russia. And given this location, Finland has long been viewed by Russia as one of their primary strategic risks, with generations of Russian leaders fearing that a larger army allied with Finland would one day cross over from their territory and bring about the end of Russian sovereignty with it. In the past, Russia has responded to their nerves about this risk by invading Finland first to try to redefine the old borders and create more strategic space for themselves. Then, in 2021, Russia resurrected a chillingly similar narrative to try to justify their invasion of Ukraine under the same exact pretenses. This leads us to the question of today. With Russia bringing old imperial talking points back off cold ice right before our own eyes, would Russia ever invade Finland again? And if they did, how would Finland respond? As we dive in, this episode is brought to you by Conflict of Nations, a free online PvP strategy game where you can choose a real country to lead into a fictional World War III scenario. In Conflict of Nations, you can face off against up to 128 other real players in real time, in immersive strategy games that can last for weeks. You get to choose your own strategy as you engage in epic battles and attempt to take over the world, as you forge alliances with other players or declare war on your neighbors in your journey to global conquest. You can choose from many different units to build your army, including tanks, jets, or nuclear submarines. And as you progress in your plans, you can play with the same account on both PC and mobile, ensuring you never miss any of the action. Right now, you can get a head start when you join Conflict of Nations with an exclusive in-game gift of 13,000 gold and a 1-month premium subscription for free, available to Icarus Project viewers by using the link in the description of this video. This offer is available for 30 days, so don't lose out and claim yours today. Thanks to Conflict of Nations for sponsoring this video. If you were to pull up the Russian-Finnish border on a detailed satellite map, you might notice an interesting phenomenon that most people miss. While most of the Russian side of the border is completely inaccessible, with exactly zero infrastructure in all but a few places, most places you looked in Finland, you would see a maze of well-maintained forest roads cut through the Finnish wilderness towards the Russian border. If you think about it, this disparity is actually rather strange, considering that each side of the border has nearly identical terrain and very similar population densities. But then you study Russia and Finland's history, and everything comes into focus. At first glance, this might just seem like a nice forest road system, and it is. But these roads are also good for a lot more besides simply accessing camping or hunting locations, or even fighting the occasional wildfire. It exists in part because of Finland's long history and experience with being invaded by Russia. And this road system, and what it represents, may be a far bigger deterrent for Russia than any concentrated military force, especially given the nature of the local geography. Along these roads, you could find various small structures, and an almost infinite number of small clearings, just large enough to park, fire, and move mobile artillery. Most of these Finnish road systems would branch off in several directions like a spiderweb, often having at least 2 or 3 different entrances into the complex, along with numerous potential emergency off-road escape locations, providing quick access to approach and flee from firing positions, with each move impossible to predict and difficult to block or cut off. Many sections of these roads, which generally twist and wind in every direction, also frequently flatten out for lengths of 600 meters or more, making them useful for a very particular purpose. On these short lengths of road, The Swedish Gripen fighter jet, specifically designed for these situations, would become the master of the sky, and it would be made readily available to Finland in the case of an invasion due to long-standing treaties between Finland and Sweden that predate their accession to NATO. The key strength of the Gripen is its ability to sustain air campaigns without ever needing to take a break from the action, and without relying on vulnerable infrastructure that could be targeted to take it out of the fight. It's able to land, refuel, rearm, and take off from these short forest roads in 10 minutes or less, allowing a small number of aircraft to maintain constant air supremacy while Russian air support is constantly having to return to base to reload. The whole thing requires a ground crew of just 6 people, only one of which needs to be a technical specialist, who can rearm the aircraft and then quickly move on to a new location before their mobile airfield is identified and bombed. Hit, run, reload, rinse, repeat. Strike from the forest using whatever you can: artillery, sniper rifles, mobile attack vehicles, or even aircraft. And then get out before the enemy ever even knows where you were. It's not cowardly, it's effective. You might be sensing a theme here. This is the modern face of organized guerrilla warfare, with infrastructure, terrain, equipment, logistics, and tactics designed to allow a smaller defending force to whittle down and out-sustain a potentially much larger invading army, while also leaving invading forces terrified, demoralized, and not knowing where the next attack might come from. And these factors are just one of the many reasons a successful Russian invasion of Finland would be almost an impossibility, something that was true even before Finland joined NATO, and is absolutely true now that they're part of the alliance. For those who might not be familiar with the concept of guerrilla warfare, this is a type of warfare that seeks to overcome certain disadvantages, such as inferiority in numbers or equipment, by adopting unconventional tactics that seek to harass, disrupt, or delay military actions rather than engaging the enemy in large, full-scale battles as much as possible. It's a dramatically effective strategy that, if done properly, can lead to huge losses for the invading force, with comparatively little damage being inflicted on the other side. And Finland is the master of guerrilla warfare, while Russia, for its part, is historically one of the nations that is the most vulnerable to it. Just for a reference point on its effectiveness, guerrilla warfare is one of the factors that allowed the much more poorly trained and supplied American colonists to gain their independence from Britain by defeating the professional British Army, considered one of the best armies in the world at that time. While the British were prepared and drilled for large engagements conducted in open fields, they didn't know how to respond when militias hit them from the trees after spotting their bright red coats, and then ran for cover before hitting them again, whittling down their forces little by little, rather than engaging them in an open battle where they were sure to lose. For its part, Russia itself also lost an empire to guerrilla warfare in the past, failing in Afghanistan when faced against the Mujahideen, who developed a mastery of guerrilla tactics, contributing to the fall of the Soviet Union. After that, Russia almost immediately lost power again to guerrilla tactics in Chechnya, as the Chechens ambushed columns of tanks moving through their cities by separating them and taking them out one tank at a time. Many more examples of Russians failing against guerrilla tactics could be cited, and Russia is clearly very vulnerable to guerrilla strategies, with a track record to prove it. This is true for a few specific reasons. Notably, the command structure of the entire Russian military is almost incapable of responding to unconventional warfare, almost as if by design, due to a desire to keep power as close as possible to the top. And despite several failures on this front, they've never really learned the lessons of the past and adjusted things, with each successive leader just figuring it was the next guy's problem. Still today, the Russian military lacks professional non-commissioned officers with the experience and authority to make independent judgments in the heat of battle. And that means it's almost impossible for Russian soldiers to make informed, on-the-fly decisions when groups of guerrillas crash into their platoons. Going back to Finland, all of this is especially worrisome for Russia, because not only is Finland more than capable of using these same guerrilla-type tactics that have broken Russia in the recent past, but they also bring their own unique modern twist to the strategy that makes it especially effective. You see, Finland isn't just a ragtag militia movement or a loosely associated connection of Mujahideen groups that would conduct guerrilla warfare out of mere necessity. Instead, Finland has a sizable, well-equipped professional army that chooses to master and adopt guerrilla tactics, while simultaneously being able to exercise more conventional operations where needed. Finland is able to focus on this because, contrary to likely Russian talking points that would be spewed out if Russia ever invaded the country, Finland's military is optimized for self-defense, and not for the invasion of their neighbors. This means that Finland has been able to focus for decades on how to optimize and maximize operations within its own terrain, because it never intended to have to push beyond that. Russia might have a lot of soldiers, but Finland has a lot of snipers who know every single strong position and ideal tree or rock to shoot behind within their local forest. If even a few of these are just a fraction as effective as the most famous Finnish sniper in history, the White Death, a single soldier who racked up a kill count of over 500 Russian soldiers during the Winter War, Russia is in big trouble. Also to Finland's advantage is the size of their army, which to many is surprisingly large. Finland is a small nation, with only around 5 million people living inside the country, equal to only about 4% of the population of Russia. But despite this, they managed to have one of the largest armies in the world, a standing army of 280,000 active and active reserve troops. That turns into nearly 900,000 strong when accounting for all reserves, which could probably be tapped into quickly in the case of a full-scale Russian invasion. This is due to universal male conscription in Finland, which means that 80% of all men in the country have military training and expertise, effectively allowing Finland to mobilize nearly every man in the country for military service if it needed to. Unlike the Russian conscripts being sent to Ukraine, these men would already be trained and ready to go. And that's not even counting the Finnish women, who are currently taking marksmanship classes in record numbers. Finland doesn't mess around. In fact, the people here have one of the highest motivations to defend their land of any country in the world. In 2016, even before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, 74% said they would defend their country if needed. And in 2021, 73% of Finns supported conscription. These numbers have likely only increased since Russia invaded Ukraine and Finland joined NATO. Finland's military is technically still smaller than Russia's military, but not really. Before it invaded Ukraine, Russia technically had up to 3 million total soldiers according to most estimates. But despite this number on paper, they have still struggled to mobilize sufficient troops for the conflict. And even on paper, most of that 3 million number is made up of 2 million reserves, which are much harder to justify mobilizing when you're invading another country versus defending your own. From their available numbers, Russia must defend all of its borders, the largest borders of any nation in the world, and not just conduct offensive operations in other countries, while Finland, for its part, could focus the entirety of their forces on their own defense. So for any given conflict, only a small percentage of the available troops could actually be used by Russia for an invasion, unless they wanted to make the eastern half of their country a very tempting target for a snatch and grab by China, who, historically, controlled many of modern-day Russia's lands. All of these things considered, it is highly likely that in a conflict between Russia and Finland, Finland would actually be able to mobilize the larger force and have the numerical advantage on the battlefield, despite their much lower population, which basically guarantees a Russian loss. Using the most relevant example we have, during the Winter War, Finland was able to inflict a nearly 6-to-1 casualty rate against the Russians using guerrilla tactics, even while outnumbered, losing around 26,000 soldiers, while the Soviets lost around 150,000, give or take. And since the Winter War, Finland has only gotten much, much better at its bread-and-butter military tactics focused on defending its specific land. Just take a look at Finland's current military equipment by the numbers, and you'll see how bad this could really be for Russia. First of all is the artillery, with Finland being one of the largest artillery powers in all of Europe, with more artillery than Poland, Germany, Norway, and Sweden combined. They currently control about 650 howitzers, which they've been stockpiling for a long time, since artillery doesn't change much as military tech evolves. These have a range of up to 70 kilometers, meaning they could be placed all throughout Finland in various spots and still be within firing range of the border. In addition to this, Finland has 120 self-propelled artillery pieces. Think mobile artillery on tank tracks, which could make use of the forest roads we already described earlier in this video to organize massive waves of fire against invading forces that never struck from the same position twice, giving the enemy a very hard time to target them and fire back. Speaking of these forest roads, and off-road terrain in general, Finland also wields over 400 tracked all-terrain transport vehicles, which have a huge advantage in the rugged Finnish wilderness over Russia's wheeled APCs, which were seen stuck all over the place with flat tires throughout the war in Ukraine. These tracked vehicles can navigate large numbers of infantry to any given area of the country relatively quickly, even in terrible wintertime conditions, allowing Finland to bring an overwhelming force to bear on any given position, and giving them a potential numerical advantage in most individual encounters they choose to engage in. So even if Russia did have a larger military, which we've already shown that they don't, since Finland could potentially outmatch the Russian fighting forces in every individual skirmish due to their high mobility, any numerical advantage Russia had would quickly wear down into meaninglessness. To enhance this, because their road networks make them so mobile, Finland could pick and choose their fights, and choose not to engage unless it was able to wield an advantage. Meanwhile, on the Russian side coming into the country, it's the opposite. There are only a handful of roads leading into Finland, all of which are far away from each other and unable to aid any of the others in a battle. To enter Finland, Russia would need to move in single-file lines of tanks, without support on their flanks. Flanks that would be readily available to the mobile Finnish army running parallel to them. In Ukraine, we saw a similar situation quickly lead to disaster for Russia, causing Russia to quickly abandon the Kyiv front due in part to most of their assault units being lost to ambushes before they ever even reached their intended destination. On a similar note, Finland also has a lot of mobile anti-air defense systems, as well as Stinger missiles, giving them air superiority over their territory to operate their small but mighty air force, which includes F-18 Super Hornets and the Swedish Gripen that we've already mentioned. To understand why that's such a big deal, just take a look at Ukraine and realize how well they've been able to stand off against Russia without meaningful air support of this kind. In other words, Russian soldiers might be able to enter Finnish territory easily enough, given the wide-open nature of the border. Finnish strategy just ensures that they'll have a hard time walking back out again, even though, eventually, that's exactly what they'll want to do if they don't want to get finished off. While guerrilla tactics don't prevent an enemy force from crossing your border, if done right, they can prevent the enemy from being successful in the purpose for the invasion, and virtually guarantee they will eventually leave. There's more to consider, all along the same themes of mobility. Logistics and supply lines for Russia would be a nightmare, while Finland would have an advantage there as well, for example. And once again, numerical advantages don't matter if you don't have a consistent way to get food and ammunition to your troops. If soldiers can't be supplied, they can't fight, no matter how many of them you might have. Then there's the infantry equipment itself. Finnish forces are equipped with a high quantity of night vision goggles. Russian forces are not. It's hard to fight an enemy ambush that you can't see, and this makes the Finnish infantry ambush strategy massively more effective than it already was. It may seem a small factor, but after a few weeks or months of overnight raids, it could quickly become the deciding one. We've said a lot about guerrilla warfare at this point, so you get the picture. But there's still a few additional factors to consider in Finland's defense strategy that makes them even stronger than this. First, let's consider Finland's response to Russia's navy, and then to the question everyone is always wondering about when I make videos like this: how Finland would defend itself against Russia's nukes. The naval front does at first seem scary for Finland when looking at a map, because they have a huge coastline and most of their major population centers are located around it. But if you've seen our video about why Russia can't invade Sweden from the Baltic Sea, you likely know what's coming next. And if you haven't, you should definitely watch that video next after this one. Common to trend for all the Scandinavian nations, Finland doesn't really have a coastline. It has several. Because Finland's coast is actually made up of nearly 190,000 islands, islets, skerries, and holms. This is not territory conducive to a naval invasion, for reasons I went in depth on in the Swedish video and won't repeat all of here, but you can always go watch that video for the full scoop. And just as Finland has mastered defense strategies for their land borders, they've done the same for their marine borders as well. Finland has a fairly large navy by ship count, numbering close to 250 vessels. But we're not talking about aircraft carriers or destroyers here. Finland has no real need for such things, because again, they never intend to invade anybody. Instead, we're talking about mine layers, mine sweepers, and missile boats. The kind of things that can make a chain of small islands a living hell for any opposing navy foolish enough to enter and threaten the archipelago. Oh, plus, there's the fast attack boats. The kind that can dart in and around Finnish islands and then disappear again before the enemy has a chance to fire back. Sensing a theme again? Since most of these vessels are small, they can easily camouflage themselves among the Finnish islands, waiting for the perfect time to strike. But these are honestly just the backup plan, because the real Finnish naval power doesn't come from its ships. It comes from its anti-ship missiles, running the gauntlet of the narrow Gulf of Finland that all Russian ships leaving St. Petersburg would need to traverse to go, well, anywhere. On the other side of this narrow gauntlet is Estonia, another NATO nation who wouldn't exactly be thrilled if this battle scenario was playing out. So, anti-ship missiles coming from there as well. In the Black Sea, Russia has managed to have its entire fleet basically nullified by Ukraine, a country that does not even have any ships, due to the effective usage of anti-ship missiles and small assault boats. In Finland, the situation would be the same, but much, much worse for Russia. Basically, Russia's fleet wouldn't even be able to leave port from St. Petersburg without doing its best imitation of the Moskva, or the Titanic for those of you who don't know what the Moskva is. Russia has the best destroyers in the world apparently. They're all capable of instantly transforming into submarines. The other half of the Baltic fleet stationed in Kaliningrad wouldn't have things much better due to the position of Sweden's Gotland Island. But again, for more on that, watch the video on Sweden. With the naval approach basically impossible, this leaves only one more option for Russia against Finland to avoid the nightmare of guerrilla warfare. We're talking about the ultimate escalation: nukes. Sounds scary, but in reality, nukes are the least likely scenario of all, especially against Finland. And for more reasons even than you're probably thinking. While Russia loves to threaten such things, the reality is Russia couldn't nuke Finland without also dousing its own second largest city, and indeed the majority of the Russian population, in toxic nuclear radiation from their own missiles. Let's set aside for a second the obvious fact that if Russia ever nuked anyone, the retaliation would be swift and fierce. Let's pretend a magical unicorn scenario has taken place, and Russia has managed to disarm every single Western nuke, clearing the way for it to fire its own missiles without fear of repercussions. It's impossible, but even if Russia achieved it, even then, Russia couldn't nuke Finland. As we discussed already in this video, the reason Russia is so worried about Finland in the first place is because Finland's major population centers are so close to Russia. Helsinki in particular, Finland's capital, largest city, and only real logical nuclear target, shares the Gulf of Finland with St. Petersburg. It's so close that if the wind just happened to be blowing in the wrong direction, the radiation from a Russian nuke here could actually stand to impact a larger number of Russians than it did Finns. Especially since the Finnish population is so spread out, while the Russian population is so concentrated around major nearby population centers. And by the way, due to the Gulf Stream, wind in the area frequently does blow in that exact direction, east from Finland towards Russia. Just like spitting and doing other things against the wind, launching a nuclear missile is not something you ever want to do if the wind is blowing it back in your direction. Let's look, for example, at the Chernobyl disaster, when a nuclear reactor exploded in northern Ukraine in 1986, nearly 1,000 kilometers away from St. Petersburg. Even at this distance, St. Petersburg and even Sweden and Finland experienced heightened cancer rates in subsequent years, as the wind carried Chernobyl radiation along the European continent. Fish in Sweden and Finland found in deep lakes were determined to be too contaminated to sell or eat. As far away as Norway, the Sami people were impacted due to radiation being absorbed by the reindeer they ate, and even the grass in parts of the UK was infected. leading to mandatory radioactive testing of sheep before it could be consumed, which stayed in place all the way until 2012. In St. Petersburg, even as late as 2016, 30 years after the disaster, activists were taking drastic measures to try to draw attention to the desperate risk Chernobyl still posed. That year, activists went on a 29-day hunger strike to draw attention to the fact that St. Petersburg's groundwater could be affected by Chernobyl radiation, affecting millions. And the thing is, the wind from Chernobyl blew mostly in the opposite direction, towards the west, but still managed to reach St. Petersburg, which sat far to its north and beyond to Finland and Sweden. Helsinki, in contrast, is on the coast only 300 kilometers away from Russia's second largest city, with wind blowing not in the opposite direction, but directly towards it over the Gulf of Finland. Local Russians fish and swim in this same water, and the rain that falls on St. Petersburg, and often even Moscow, originates here. Because of this, ultimately, somewhere between half and 3/4 of all of Russia's population could be at risk of some type of major health consequences if they chose to nuke Finland. So effectively, if Russia nukes Finland's capital, they're also nuking themselves, creating a public health catastrophe potentially magnitudes greater than Chernobyl for its own major population centers, since the bombs used today are over 80 times more powerful than the ones that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And because Chernobyl did not sit on the coast of a major body of water from which Russia gets much of its rain. Not even a Russian dictator could survive the backlash that would come from such an incident. Anecdotally, in case you're a European worried about a Russian nuke, the same thing is also true for Tallinn, the capital of Estonia, and it's also true to a lesser degree of the other major capitals in the Baltic Sea, including Copenhagen, Denmark, Stockholm, Sweden, and Riga, Latvia, which all sit on the same environmental infrastructure as St. Petersburg. Water evaporated from the sea outside Stockholm can and does often fall as rain over the Russian mainland. So Russia cannot actually nuke any of its nearby neighbors without effectively nuking itself, meaning that nuclear warfare is not really a viable option for Russia at all, even if they could miraculously disable every nuke in the NATO arsenal and prevent a counterattack. Ironically, this means that because Finland is Russia's next-door neighbor, it's actually one of the safest nations in the world from the risk of a Russian nuke. And this also protects the rest of the world from Russian nukes, because as long as conventional forces can be stationed here, and in the Baltic states to retaliate, even if Russia could successfully disable a nuclear response, they still couldn't nuke anyone without their largest cities quickly being crushed by a conventional response. So, yeah. But even if the worst did happen, and Russia did Russian things, Finland still wouldn't be defenseless. Long ago, to protect themselves from the threat of irrational nuclear warfare, Finland built what is probably the most extensive system of nuclear bunkers in the world. And by the way, these work for barrages of conventional missiles or artillery as well, helping to protect and preserve the Finnish population in case of war. In Helsinki alone, there are enough bunkers to house the entire population of 640,000 people, along with the living essentials needed to sustain themselves for weeks or even months. By the time those supplies ran thin, the Russians would be getting doused in the open by their own radiation, while the Finns would be sitting in underground saunas with enough food to last all winter, mainly upset that they couldn't go outside to use their cold plunge. Okay, maybe slightly exaggerated, but you get the point. Gotta lighten this up somehow, folks. Come on. If Russia wants to attack Finland, they only have one option: bear the brunt of the best equipped guerrilla army in the world, now with the backing of its NATO allies, and fight tooth and nail for every inch of land, the precedent for which shows the Russians taking a 6-to-1 loss ratio from the Finns, without any other nation even being involved. And this bears massive risks for Russia's overall defense strategy if they do so, risks that just aren't worth the cost. Because if Russia invaded Finland, even if they were successful, the truth is they wouldn't gain much strategically, but they would put some of their own most strategic infrastructure at risk. For example, the Kola Highway, officially the R21 highway, is the only viable link between Murmansk and the rest of Russia. This highway sits a mere 20 to 50 miles away from the Finnish border, depending on where you look, well within striking distance of Finnish artillery if Russia started a conflict. not to mention HIMARS or ATACMS missiles, or F-18s. In Murmansk, where the highway ends, is stationed most of Russia's nuclear-capable naval fleet, effectively meaning that a huge portion of their own nuclear deterrence is vulnerable to being massively hindered overnight in a conflict with Finland. All Finland has to do is disable a few small spots of the highway, and Russia's primary nuclear deterrence can no longer be supplied by land. Losing this alone would hurt Russia more than anything they would gain from an invasion. And even if Russia could subdue Finland's military, the fight would be far from over. The Finnish people would likely resist for the foreseeable future, effectively meaning that all Russia would gain from such an effort would be a very angry, rebellious province. As with any battle, victory isn't just about subduing enemy forces. It's about subduing them at a cost that makes sense, so that you actually gain a strategic advantage by doing it. This would simply not be possible for Russia in Finland. Even in Ukraine, such a possibility of victory is questionable for Russia. And Russia took Ukraine by surprise when they were unprepared, and still failed to achieve a quick victory. Finland, for its part, is prepared, with an already fortified border wall, well-positioned artillery, and a strong air force. Not to mention Article 5 commitments, guaranteeing other nations will come to their defense, most of which Ukraine has lacked, but has still been able to mostly hold the Russians off. So let's take one final look at that defense infrastructure and make what is perhaps the most important point of this entire video. Specifically, let's look again at the forest roads where we started. They may seem simple, but they are a powerful object lesson and visual representation of the different intentions of the two nations on either side of this border. On the Finnish side, we see a maze of roads to access nearly every conceivable spot of land, allowing for the defense of every inch of territory and every small home and shack. All are seen as vital to the Finnish people, and the system is designed to protect them. On the Russian side, we see just a few military bases concentrated around major highways. The rest of the territory around the border, for all intents and purposes, may as well not even be a real part of Russia, because there is no infrastructure in place for people to actually even utilize it, and much of it is almost never seen by human eyes. The Russian bases do allow one thing though. They can't defend their own borders effectively, but they can quickly concentrate a force to push down the highway and into Finland if they so choose. Finland's system is designed to protect what they have. Russia's system is only designed to punch through and take things away from others. Apparently, even they know that the possibility of an invasion from Finland is baloney, and so have only prepared for one thing. And no amount of Russian propaganda can take away what you can see with your own eyes in satellite imagery. If they truly believed NATO aggression was really such a threat here, Russia would be a lot more prepared. So Russia, I have a modest proposal. Instead of conquering other nations to gain more territory, just build some more roads to the untouched parts of this massive landmass you already control. That will do far more for the breathing space and livelihoods of your people than any war ever could. There are hundreds and thousands of lakes and streams within your own territory that your people can't even access because you haven't built the infrastructure to access them. That infrastructure would be far cheaper to maintain than your military campaigns against your neighbors. But then again, more infrastructure wouldn't satisfy the ego of a leader who wants to go down in history for creating a larger Russian map. So there's that. Finland has nothing to worry about, but neither does Russia. All they have to do is leave Finland and everyone else around them alone. We'll see what happens. For more, go watch our other video in this series on Sweden's defense strategy, and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for future episodes as well. For our Finnish viewers, we created a special shirt for you in light of this episode that's sure to get you a second look, so you can go check that out in our store. In the meantime, don't forget to start your journey on Conflict of Nations, a free online PvP strategy game simulating a modern global warfare scenario. Click on the link in the description to get your exclusive gift of 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. This offer is only available for 30 days, so don't miss out.